Hello everybody, it's Miss Lisa and I'm back with session 4 of ARTREE Goes Almost Live. Today I'm going to tell you about an artist named Paul Klee. Paul was born in 1879 in Switzerland and he died in 1940. He was a very interesting child. He drew and was very musical, so he did music and drawing a lot as a child. And as he grew up, he continued to draw, and then he took a trip to Africa when he was a young adult, and this had a very profound effect on his artwork. He was fascinated by the landscapes and the colors and the patterns of Africa, and he said, "Color has got me." And at this point, he said he became a painter. So now he's working with colors and paint, and he did many paintings during his lifetime. I love his work. He has an interesting way of painting and using color that I really admire. He studied color intensely, and he taught art as well. He also became a lifelong friend of the Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky, who you will remember from the second class that I taught in the series. Now, what I'm going to show you today is how to draw a fish. And I'm going to show you how to draw a fish based on lines and shapes that you already know how to do. And this art lesson is it's inspired by this work here called the Goldfish that Paul Klee did in 1925. I want to show you how you can do something similar by using oil pastels or crayons and maybe watercolor paints. So what will we need for this project? I like to do the goldfish on black construction paper, and I like to do the colors with either oil pastels, these are Crayola oil pastels, or crayons. Crayons work fine as well. A note for teachers and parents, the oil pastel sets come in a class pack that I really love. So if you want to get oil pastels for your whole classroom, this is the way to go. This is just one set here. It comes in a big box with 24 sets of colors. Now, what I'm going to also have here is a piece of manila paper where I will draw some things as I explain them before we go back onto either the black construction paper, or you can also do this on a white piece of paper if you do not have any black. And what I plan to do is to do the whole thing once on black paper, and then I'll do it again on white paper and show you how we can use either oil pastels or crayons and watercolor paints to get a similar effect. So I'm going to start out with my black piece of paper, and I'm going to be thinking about the shape of the fish. And what I wanted to show you is that this fish shape is actually made up of shapes that you know how to draw already. So we can think about the head as being a triangle shape, and we can think about the body as being a longer triangle shape. We can also think about the tail as being a triangle. We can think about the dorsal fin, which is the one here on the back, as being a rectangle shape. And we can add some more fins as rectangle shapes. I may even add a dorsal fin today, which would be a triangle shape here. And then we've got the eye shape, which is a nice circle. And in this eye shape, I actually made a little bit of a spiral. The scales on the fish's body, we can think of the scales as being bumpy lines. Remember the curved line that bumps along like this, makes a bumpy line? So here we have some vertical bumpy lines, and I added a few vertical lines as well. The seaweed down here, we can use curvy lines for the seaweed, and I'll show you how to do those shapes in a little while. There are different sorts of seaweed that we can draw with these curvy lines, and we can of course always add some leaves with more curved lines, or we can call those little oval shapes. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to be thinking about the head shape, and I'm going to be using a yellow oil pastel. Although, like I said, the yellow crayon also works well. If you're wearing long sleeves and you're using the pastels, remember to pull up your sleeves so that you don't get pastel on the edges of your sleeves. It's hard to get oil pastel out of your clothes. Now, as you can see, my pastel is kind of dirty. They end up this way very easily because they're soft, and so the other colors will stick to them, and they get all kind of messed up. But I don't mind this. If this bothers you, the way to clean a pastel is to take a piece of paper towel and just gently wipe off the top until the color is bright again. So I wiped off some of those other colors on this pastel. I don't normally do that when I use pastels, but here we go. I've cleaned my yellow. So now I'm thinking about that head shape again. And I'm thinking about drawing a triangle. I want it to be big enough that I can get an eye in there, but I don't want it to be so big that when I draw the rest of the fish, I won't have space for the seaweed, because I like the seaweed in here as well. So I'm going to be thinking about a triangle about this big, and I'm just going to draw that over here. Now I want to make a triangle for the body, and that triangle is going to be longer. So I'm going to make a longer triangle here. And you can see that the head-shaped triangle joins up with that long body-shaped triangle. And now I'm going to add the tail, which we can also draw as a simple shape of a triangle. Now, if you have a hard time picturing how to get this shape stuck to the body shape so it looks like a tail, what you can do is take this long line from the body and just extend it a little bit, and take this long line from the body and extend that line too, and then just draw a vertical line so that you have the triangle for the tail, and now that's joined up to the triangle for the body, which is joined up to the triangle for the head. The next thing we're going to do is add the dorsal fin. So the dorsal fin is the fin that sticks up on the back of a fish, and we can make that shape like a long rectangle. So let's do that now. I'm going to picture this as being part of the rectangle, and so I'm going to need a line that's similar to that line up here. So I've got a rectangle shape, And I'm going to add, like I said, I'm going to add a pectoral fin to this fish. So I'm going to add a triangle shape here. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. And then I'm going to put a couple more fins down here as rectangle shapes. And now I'm going to make an eye shape. And I'm going to add, actually I'm going to switch to the white pastel now, and I'll make the eye shape with white. And I'm going to start adding some fins. Now you could do a lot of little bumpy lines like this. You can be very precise, or you can just do it here and there. Like on this fish here, we have 3 scales here. Did I say fins? I mean scales. We have 3 scales here. We have 2 scales here. We have 2 here and 1 here. You know in reality that the whole fish's body is covered with these scales, but you can just give an indication of scales here and there. You don't need to draw them all, but if you want to, I'll show you how to do that. I'll put a couple more in here. If you want to fill up the whole body with scales, think of another bumpy line where this comes down and then up and down and up and down, so that when the bumpy line comes here, it joins the top of the bumpy line previously. It goes up and down and it joins the top of this bumpy line. So now when I do my next set of scales, I can start here and bump down onto the top of this scale, up and down to the top of this scale, and up. And likewise, if I do another row, I can bump down to the top of that scale, up, down to the top of that scale, and up. And that's how you can fill up the whole fish's body with scales if you want to do that. So as I've started doing that here, I'll just continue until I fill up the body. You don't have to do it this way. In this case, remember, I just made a few scales here and there, and it kind of gives you the feeling that this whole fish is covered in scales. Okay, so this fish is covered in scales. And now I'm going to add some little structures in the fins. If you've ever felt a fish, you know that their fins are a little bit stiff. And we can add some little structures like this. And we're making all of these with straight lines. I'm going to turn my fish this way so that I can easily make the lines in the tail. They're again straight lines. Some of them are a bit more diagonal, some of them are a bit more vertical. Of course, when you turn the fish this way, they're no longer vertical, they're horizontal. I'm also going to add a little bit of red in here and there, just as an accent color, because I want these nice warm colors in my fish. And I'm going to put a spiral in that eye. Remember, the spiral line starts out like a circle, but it doesn't come back to itself. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm going to put some orange in there too. Now at this point, I'm going to start filling in with the yellow. And watch what happens. Instead of coloring the whole body yellow, I can use little marks if I want. Or you can color the whole thing. But what I'm doing now is I'm going to actually cover that joining line where the two triangles meet up, and we won't ever know it was there. We won't ever realize that this fish was made out of a series of triangles, because I'm just going to color right over that line like this. And you can see that a little bit of the orange and red got stuck to the yellow there and got pulled along, but I don't mind that. I actually like that little bit of color that gets mixed in when I use oil pastels, and that's why I tend not to clean them off before I start. I don't mind. I like that. Okay, I'm going to add some in here now between the scales. A little bit up here in the dorsal fin. If you're using crayon, go ahead and press down pretty hard, because the crayon is not as soft as the oil pastel, so you'll have to push down a little bit harder to get the color to be bright on the black paper. Okay, so here's my fish. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making some seaweed. I'm going to start with the greens. I've got two greens here. I've got a darker green and a sort of a yellow-green color. And with this Crayola set of crayons, I've got one green, but I'm going to go ahead and use these two. Now, wavy lines are a great way to start with seaweed, because if you've ever seen seaweed growing under the ocean, when the waves come through, the seaweed goes back and forth like this. It's attached to the ground, but it moves like this. And so let's start out with some wavy lines. So I'm going to think about maybe one here, and maybe one here. Now watch what happens when I take another wavy line. I'm going to start up at the top, and I'm going to wave that on top. And all of a sudden it looks like a piece of seaweed that's moving in the water. Okay, let me do another one here. Wavy line, and I'm going to start with my pastel where I started before, but now my wavy line is not going to be the same wavy line. I'll just move back and forth a little bit differently, and that starts to look like seaweed. I can do that also with my darker green. And I think I'm going to make a different kind of seaweed up here, which will be similar, but it's going to be bigger. And I'm not going to cross over two wavy lines this time. I'll leave them separate and put a line down the center. Now we've got a nice big piece of seaweed here. What else can we draw? We can make some little leaves, little sea plant down there with a wavy line and some little oval shapes or curved lines. Maybe I'll put one over here as well. Wavy line. And I think I want to put a little bit of purple down here too, because beautiful under the sea colors. I've got my greens. I think I'm going to make a couple pieces of seaweed that are purple. And I think I'll make a little sea plant down here too that has purple leaves. I can also make maybe this kind of seaweed or sea plant that has little lines like this. So a curved line and then some tiny little straight lines. And I think I'm going to add some blue as well. Maybe there's some blue seaweed down here. Now the other thing I'm going to do with the blue pastel is to make some wavy lines that make us feel like the water is maybe moving as the fish. The fish will certainly make the water move as it swims through the water, but maybe also there's a little bit of a current. We can add some wavy lines like this. And for this piece here, I actually had a broken piece of a lighter pastel, and I just rubbed the side of that pastel along the paper to fill it up pretty quickly with this lighter blue color. But for this one, I don't have that. I'm just going to add a few more wavy lines and maybe just a little bit of blue color near the fish. Now Paul Klee's piece, the Goldfish, actually has a lot of little fish also around here, around the top of the corners and down here hiding in the seaweed. But this is a nice simple drawing or oil pastel here, done with one goldfish and some beautiful seaweed. When I do oil pastels, I've been pushing down pretty hard when I use the yellow and cover the black when I put in the seaweed. But when I'm using the blue, I'm not pressing down hard. I'm letting that black show through. Because, you know, water down deep in the ocean is going to look kind of dark. There's no light down there. There's not as much light. Okay, so here we have the goldfish done on black construction paper with oil pastels. Now I'm going to do this again on white paper so you can see a different way to use artist materials. And if you only have white paper, follow along with me. Okay. So I'm going to again use the oil pastels just because they are going to show up a little bit better than my crayon, but I could use the yellow crayon instead. And I'm going to start with the simple shape of the head, which, as you remember, we're going to do with a triangle. And you might want to think before you make your triangle how big to make it so that you have enough space to put the longer triangle for the body, and then enough space that you still have room for the tail shape. So let's start. I'm going to make a vertical line, and I'm going to make a vertical line and an angled line so that they make an outline of a triangle. And then from this vertical line, I'm going to make the triangle for the body, which is going to be longer than the head triangle. But I don't want it to be so long that there's no room for the tail. So here I've left space for the tail, and I'm going to add that triangle. Remember, if it's hard for you to figure out how to put the triangle on so it meets the body, just extend this line outwards and extend this line outwards until you get kind of an X shape, and then join the bottoms of that X together to give you that triangle. Okay, so now we've got the head triangle, the body triangle, and the tail triangle. And I'm going to go ahead and add the dorsal fin. And I'm going to add a pectoral fin here. It's a little triangle shape. And I'm going to add a couple more smaller rectangle shapes down here for more fins. Okay, so that's the basic shape of our fish. And now I'm going to start using a little bit of orange here. So I know it's hard to see from the front facing camera. I'm going to go ahead and put the eye shape in. And I'm going to start putting some of the orange in the fins. That will help you see where the fish is on my white piece of paper, because the yellow doesn't show up super well. If you feel like you have to turn the paper, please do so. It's helpful to turn your paper whichever way makes the drawing easier for you. And I'm always turning my paper when I draw. It's very rarely that I do a whole drawing without turning the paper somewhat. Same with painting. When I paint on a canvas, I end up painting half of it one direction and then turning my canvas and painting more of it another direction. It's just how it goes. Okay, I'm going to add a spiral shape in red, and I'm going to put a little bit of red in these fins as well. So you can see I've got these nice warm colors, yellow, orange, and red in my goldfish. And I'm reserving the cool colors, the green, blue, and purple, for the background. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my yellow, and I'm going to start filling in some of my fish. I'm going to start up here at the head, and I'm going to work over that line that divides the line that was made by the two triangles attaching. So I'm going to get rid of that triangle. And of course, if I start putting in white scales, it's going to be very hard to see on the white paper. And you can do that. You can do that if you wish. But I'm going to use orange, I think, so that you'll be able to see it better. So remember, we're going to use a bumpy line. We're going to use a vertical, standing up, bumpy line to make the scales. And you can think of them as little C's, or you can think of it as a bumpy line. And instead of drawing each of these like I did before, I'm going to do some of them as suggestions, by doing one here and there, and have some of them connect up here and there. So this way I don't have to draw every single scale like I did here. Okay? Just suggest now that this fish is covered in scales. And I'm going to put more yellow in. I'm not covering up the whole thing with the yellow. You could if you wanted, but I'm just going to make some little hatchy marks and leave some of the white showing through. And again, my yellow is starting to mix with some of that orange. It's okay. I like that. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow up here in the dorsal fin. Put a little bit of yellow down here. Also a bit in the tail. I love using oil pastels because I get such a rich coverage of color. They also come in a whole bunch of cool color. I shouldn't say cool. They come in a whole bunch of amazing colors, some of which are cool, some of which are warm, and I love using them. All right, so now we've got our fish done this way, and let's go ahead and think about those seaweed shapes again. I was going to use this piece of paper to show you a little bit in more detail how we can draw some of these seaweed shapes. I'm just going to use a pencil so that you can get a good look at what I'm doing. So the first seaweed shape we're going to make with that wavy line that we learned last time when we did the Kandinsky piece. And now we're going to start at the top of the wave, and we're going to make another wavy line, but it doesn't have to match the one we've already done. That one matched pretty closely. Let me do one that doesn't. So maybe it sticks out here more, there. Okay, any way you do this, it's going to look like seaweed sort of moving in the water. So I love doing this for seaweed. Let's see what else we can do. If we take the wavy line and we don't overlap the wavy line we just made, we make another wavy line out here and then draw center line. This is a different kind of seaweed with a broader sort of leaf. We can also make some interesting sea plants. Something like this. You might have seen these in aquariums. We can do something similar that has little leaves. All sorts of little sea plants. And we can do something with bigger leaves. And these are just curved lines. And we could do We could actually do, this is a little bit more complicated, but some seaweeds are almost like hands. So for you older kids or ones that love to draw, here's some fun sort of seaweed shapes too. Okay. So with that in mind, let's go back to our fish. And let's think of some cool seaweed. So I'm going to start out with this sort of yellow-green color, and I'm going to make some of the overlapping curved wavy lines first. A wavy line, overlapping wavy line. Make one down here too, wavy line, overlapping wavy line. I'm going to go with my dark green and do the same. And what I'm planning to do with this is paint over it. So I'm going to do something a little bit different than I did before, because I'm going to color in some of these green shapes a little bit here. And I'm going to take some of that green and I'm going to make some sea plants. Maybe one here. Maybe a bit more seaweed and blue. I think I'll make one of these kind of plants. You can have a lot of fun with the seaweed. And I think I'll take some purple and I'm going to put a little bit of purple in there too. Maybe little shadow shapes, maybe little plants, and maybe a little bit of indication that this is the bottom of the sea. Now I'm going to take my blue and add some wavy lines. Helps us remember that fish is under the water. I might even put a little bit of purple in there. Why not, right? Okay. Now my plan for this version, which is done on white paper, is now to paint over it with watercolor paint. And I'm going to be using black and blue to make a dark blue color. And because I've used oil pastel, And it will work also with crayon if you press down to get a really good coverage. Let me just finish this eye. I wanted to put some orange in there too. So what's going to happen is that the oil from the oil pastels or the oil in your crayons is going to prevent the watercolor paint from sticking anywhere where the pastel is already on the paper. So let's go to our paints. I've got my paint box here, same one as I used in lesson 2 in the Kandinsky painting. I'm going to start out by rinsing my brush. And then I'm going to go into the clean water to make sure my brush is super clean. And I'm going to be using blue and black to paint to finish this piece of art. So let's go into the blue first. The blue is here next to the green, and I'm going to go get my brush wet and go round and 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 round to get that paint nicely liquid. So it's not all liquid, just the top layer where the water is will be liquid. And now I've got paint in my brush, and I can go back to my painting here and go right over it. I'm going to get more paint all over that. Just going to go back and forth into my paint box and onto my paper. Although I have 2 containers of water here, it's not really that important today because I'm only using blue and black. So I know that I won't have any trouble mixing colors into my lighter colors because I'm not using them today. You can see how as I paint over this pastel, it's not sticking. It will only stick to the white paper where I didn't put any color. I think at this point I'll add a little bit of black in there. Round and round and round in the black. I'll put some of that in there too. And mix it in with that blue. I'm also leaving a little border, as you can see. I'm leaving a little bit of paper unpainted at the edges, and that way I don't get paint all over my table or desk. This is something I do teach the kids when we do watercolor painting. It's a good way to keep your table clean, and you also at the same time make a beautiful white border for your artwork, kind of like a little white frame. I'm going to go right over this. I want to move that color on pretty quickly. So I've covered my whole painting now, except for the nice white border. back and put a little bit more on my fish here, because I like that black showing through those little tiny white spots that I left. Okay, so I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to rinse out my brush, rinse it out again, dry it on the paper towel. And now I'm just going to take my paper towel and fold it and very gently dab in the areas where the pastel is, because I know that the paint is not going to stick to that pastel, so it comes off in those areas. I don't want to do too much dabbing or I'm going to take a lot of the paint right off again, but just here and there. Okay. So here is our second way to do this painting. If you only have white paper, you can use white paper and then your pastels or crayons and paint over it with watercolor. So here is the goldfish in pastel and watercolor on white paper. Here is the goldfish with pastel only on black paper. I hope you enjoyed that lesson, and we will be back again soon with another lesson for you. And keep painting and drawing. Have some fun. Thanks. This is Miss Lisa. Goodbye.